Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight for the third in the series of Loudoun Climate Project's Climate Talks. My name is Natalie Pien, and I'm the inaugural president of Loudoun Climate Project. And we have a couple other officers with Loudoun Climate Project. Chris Tandy, want to raise your hand, Chris, is our inaugural vice president. Sarah Richardson is our inaugural secretary. And that's all we have for officers today. So before we begin the program, please remain muted during the presentations and put your questions in the chat. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. So tonight's program is all about what can be done in Loudoun County to mitigate climate change while enhancing Loudoun's environment. We're fortunate to have three guest speakers today. First will be Kyle Dingus. He is the Loudoun County Urban Forester in the Department of Building and Development. And tonight he will discuss the benefits of native trees for the environment and climate. Then Chris Stone is with the Loudoun County Stormwater Management Project and the Chesapeake Bay Total Maximum Daily Load Compliance Specialist. So Chris is going to talk about how stormwater management areas can be retrofitted to enhance the environment and improve water quality. And then our final speaker will be Renee Griebe, and she is the Northern Virginia Conservation Advocate for the Audobon Naturalist Society, and she leads efforts in Northern Virginia to protect watersheds and to respond to the climate emergency. She serves on Fairfax County's Environmental Quality Advisory Council and is a trained master naturalist. She has considerable experience leading conservation projects within her homeowners association and removing invasive plants from parkland. Renee will finish the program presentations with how to advocate for long-term success of conservation projects Chris will describe. So, Kyle, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you very much. A moment, share my screen here. All right, well, welcome everyone. Glad to be with you tonight. Again, my name is Kyle Dingus, and I'll be talking about the benefits of native trees for the environment and climate. So just to give you a little background on me, I do serve as the Loudoun Urban Forester, and I am the subject matter expert on trees and forest. A lot of my job, I complete plan review for development, basically, development applications that range from data centers to subdivisions, and I make sure that our tree and forest related requirements are met by those applicants. I also get to do fun stuff like outreach to you great folks as part of my job as well. I collaborate with a lot of partner groups, and I also assist other departments as necessary. So our outline for today, we're going to go over just some tree basics. We're then going to follow up on the benefits of native trees, and then finally cap everything off with the importance of native trees. So I always like to start my presentations out with how trees grow, how and why they grow, because it's not very well understood by a lot of folks. So basically, a tree is nothing but a bunch of little old straws. That's basically all it is. They have very specific growth patterns, so they only grow in certain places. They basically grow out every year, or I like to describe as they basically get fatter every year because the tissues expand out on their bark. And then they also grow at the branch tips and also below ground at the root tips. So as we get into, the springtime of the year, the trees break dormancy, they start to produce leaves, they start to pump a lot of water and nutrients up to the crown, which the leaves start making the sugars. The sugars go down the tree to the roots. The roots are basically the bank account of the tree. And then we also, again, the cycle continues with water going back up. So trees are really amazing in how they grow, how they adapt, and all of the great benefits we get just by keeping those trees happy and letting them do what they do best. So this is an important part, I think, of a tree's ecology. This is the root system of trees. And one of the things I want you to recognize is that the roots, they're not going deep, they're going out. Trees, like anything else in nature, want to be lazy. So a lot of the good soil that they have access to the nutrients is in the upper layers. So trees in our neck of the woods don't generally go very deep because, one, they don't need to, and two, they can get all their needs met in the upper layers of the soil. So the tree roots grow out, and they're the big bank account of the tree. They store a lot of the reserve energies. So always like to see this. This was from a root appreciation day at one of the seminars I was at. So just kind of a neat picture. Also, again, I talked about, the cambial growth, or the tissues expanding out. So our trees produce rings. They technically produce 2 rings a year. Right now, they're producing what we call spring wood, which are basically straws that are really, really wide. And then as the season expands on and we go into summer, trees basically, they produce a second growth of rings that get smaller and smaller and smaller. That's called the summer wood. So if you ever look at the cross-sectional area of a tree, or as we like to call them, tree cookies, you'll notice kind of wide spaces and then really, really thin lines. And then we all know if you count tree rings, they can tell you age. Also, trees leave excellent climate data in records. And in fact, from what I understand, a lot of climate data was obtained by very, very old bald cypress trees in the coastal plain of Virginia. So they do leave us really wonderful records of climatic conditions and growth conditions as well. So trees also, they need light, water, nutrients, and space. And most importantly, each tree has its own individual light preference. So some trees like full sun, some trees like a mixture of partial sun and shade, and other trees like full shade. It really depends upon that individual tree species. So for example, trees like yellow poplar, if you're planting a seedling, you need to make sure that seedling has full sunlight. If we're planting something like a black gum or a beech tree, we need to put that tree in the shade because they're just adapted to grow in those particular light conditions. It's no different than if you go to a nursery and you pull a label and you'll see that it has, where you can plant that, particular species, and then it'll have like a light preference on it. So a couple more interesting about trees, trees are specifically adapted to grow in certain conditions. Some trees like to grow in very wet places. Some trees like to grow in very dry places. Some trees are generalists and you can pretty much plop them in the ground anywhere. Other trees are only going to be happy in certain areas. So that, combined with their light preferences, is really important when we think about planting. Trees are very long-lived. A lot of our trees have the potential to live a couple hundred years. Some trees only live, less than 100 years. It depends upon the species. They don't respond quickly to things. So if you we see this all the time in the development world. If you put in a subdivision in the middle of the woods, you typically don't see the trees dying off until a couple years after. And that's just because trees are on a completely different time schedule than we are. 20, 30, 40 years isn't that long to a tree with an organism that can live to be a couple hundred. So that's also important to note. Trees don't heal. They do a process called sealing. So if a tree is wounded, it basically tries to grow over that wound instead of trying to heal it. So that's kind of interesting. And again, I've kind of hinted to this, like anything else in nature, they want to live and be lazy about it. So if you plant a tree in a nice wide open space, it's not going to grow very tall like the one in the picture. It's going to grow out and basically have its leaves, make sure that it gets all the sunlight. So one also important thing to think about is, the picture on the right was taken just outside of the village of Aldi. And it's a really good example of kind of our Piedmont topography. Each one of those arrows is a different forest type on the landscape. And that's based off of, the aspect, whether it's facing north or south, east or west, it's going to have a different plant community. It's dependent on the topography. Is it in a bowl? Is it in a valley? Is it on the side of a hill? So forest species distribution varies across the landscape. And there's other things that play in, like wildlife distribution, old agricultural practices. You know, if a farmer abandons a crop field, it's going to grow a different forest than if they abandon a pasture or a paddock area. So, you know, again, this all goes back to trees have very specific preferences because in the wild, you know, they've adapted to grow certain places. So also to do, what do I mean for natives? For practical planting purposes, I suggest using Virginia natives. That's a really, really important distinction. You know, we have a lot of great diversity here in Virginia. You know, and a lot of our trees in Loudoun County are found all over the state as well. Generally, when we're talking about urban areas or planting sites that have been developed before, you typically have compacted soils, low fertile soils, and typically high moisture retention. So you're kind of limiting your plant selection to those that grow in riparian areas. The picture on the right is a little bald cypress forest. Bald cypress is not naturally found in Loudoun County, but this was taken in the southern part of the county, and they're very, very happy here. So, you know, for natives, as long as you're using Virginia, even if it's tree that may not be from Loudoun County, as long as it's in the right site, it's going to be just fine. So some importance of natives, again, we always want right tree, right place. The natives are adapted to our specific weather climates, to our basic ecologies, you know, all of the symbiotic interactions that happen, you know, not only with the plants, but with the insects and mammals, and all these huge parts of our food webs are connected with our native species. So when we plant native trees, we kind of do honor to all those natural associations. Also, if we're planting native trees, we're not planting invasive species like pear trees. You know, or burning bush or Japanese barberry or something like that. When invasive species get on the landscape, they hurt the native ecology because they're not from there and they tend to take over. And also, from a financial standpoint, if you correctly plant native trees and follow right tree, right place, you're going to have less maintenance over time, because it's not like you're planting a fir tree or something that belongs in the Arctic that's going to require a lot more maintenance over the life of the tree. So I always like to remind people, native trees always work for us. And if you think about it, every second of your life, you're benefiting from plants because hopefully you're breathing. So we get oxygen and all these other things. But, you know, looking at climate, they store carbon dioxide, provide oxygen, excuse me, sequester carbon in their tissues and in the soil. They protect soil quality, protect water quality, provide habitat. Man, these things are always doing some good for us. So right tree, right place, rather we're talking about reforestation, where we want the tree to aggressively colonize our open area and grow into a forest. So you would want trees that are shade intolerant, that do that in the landscape. For a more traditional, like, you know, maybe urbanized or developed like landscaping settings, we want to make sure that, you know, when we're planting a tree, we're not planting it under a power line or too close to a house. So we have to watch our space. We have to understand, you know, what the soil is. Are we putting this in a very wet area, very dry area? Check the available light. Please check for utilities anytime you plant trees in a you know, around your house. That's a big thing. But you need to match the trees to the site and the job they need to do. So if you need a shade tree, or if you need trees for reforestation so that we can basically grow a forest back from a previously open area, you know, we have to put the right tree in the right place. So again, these are just pictures. If you set that tree up for success and you pick the right tree, you plant it correctly, and you let it do what it does, it's going to be gravy there in the end. Because, you know, I like to say, you know, we want happy trees, and happy trees grow really well. They have less health issues, and they're going to do better in the long run. So again, kind of capping everything off, the importance of native trees. They're adapted to colonize our growing space. If planted and established correctly, there are less maintenance over time. I do want to mention real quick, please factor in maintenance of your tree for the life of that tree. And I would caution, you know, you have to do the maintenance, follow through on watering, proper pruning if necessary. So make sure to factor in that maintenance, really, really important. They supplement the natural ecology of our site. So again, the insects and the flora and fauna, are familiar with the native species. And also, generally they're the right tree for the right place in our environment. So thank you all again. Here's my contact information. If you ever have any questions on county regulatory or just kind of basic forestry or arboricultural questions, please let me know. If you have a property and would like, a natural resource person to come out and give you technical assistance, you can reach out to the Virginia Department of Forestry, Loudoun Soil and Water Conservation District, our Virginia Cooperative Extension, and the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So you can reach out to all those. Thank you all again, and I will hand this back over to Natalie.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Chris. Kyle, yeah. So I like that, right tree, right place. Yeah, you have to know everything about the exposure and the soil. Okay, now we're gonna hear from Chris and the program he has.
All right, can everybody see my screen? We're good, okay. All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Chris Stone. My title at the county is the Stormwater Chief. I actually have the pleasure of working with 6 engineers and technicians here in our group, and we're charged through the county to essentially make sure that the stormwater system is maintained, and then we also have a permit with DEQ for discharge of stormwater. And all of those permit requirements fall under us to make sure that the county stays in compliance. And tonight, I'm just going to kind of walk you through stormwater in Loudoun County, what our program does. And then at the end, I'll highlight some projects that we've done to get your creative juices flowing, to see if there's things in your communities that you might be interested in. So I always like to start off whenever I have an audience to try to do a little education. Many people think that, all the stormwater goes to the water treatment plant. And in fact, it does not. So the pipes that are in your streets, it's really a tale of two stories. The sewage that leaves your home and businesses, and that does go to a water treatment plant, and it gets treated before it is discharged. But the water that falls out of the sky as rain and ends up in our stormwater system, that effectively gets discharged directly to the streams. And although there is some treatment of that and some collection if it flows through a pond, for example, many of our outfalls discharge directly to channels and waterways of the county. And it sounds like we're starting to get a storm. Stormwater, that was timely. And the other thing that I like to remind people is, there's Loudoun County Stormwater, which is my group. We're funded by the county. We're a county agency. And then there's Loudoun Water, which is a utility. So you pay a fee to Loudoun Water, and that's how they're essentially funded. So that picture right there is a picture of one of their water treatment plants. Actually, it's one of their new ones on Goose Creek. So we take care of stormwater, and Loudoun Water takes care of your drinking water and your sewage. So when it comes to the permit, we are intertwined with a lot of other shareholders in the county. So the towns, some of the towns have their own permit and their own kind of rules and regulations for how they deal with stormwater. VDOT is also a permit holder. So if you have an inlet that's in a VDOT right away, that is going to be authorized and managed by VDOT. Then obviously the county, as I discussed. And then there's a lot of private property owners that have stormwater infrastructure on their own private property, whether that be an inlet, a pipe, and in some cases, stormwater ponds. And then there are also some other permit holders in the county, like the airport and some federal facilities and things like that. So when you're talking about, I always like to joke, because anytime somebody asks me a question about stormwater in Loudoun County, I always respond with, well, it depends. So, you kind of have to ask a couple other questions about who is who owns it, who's authorized to maintain it, et cetera. We in the county, we maintain stormwater infrastructure that is within a stormwater easement and is dedicated to the county. If those things exist, then if there's an issue with, say, a pond, a channel, an inlet, we will take care of that. And we also, like I said at the beginning of my talk, our other charge, if you will, or authorization is compliance with our MS4 discharge permit. And I know it's a lot of acronyms, but essentially we have a permit through DEQ to discharge our stormwater to the waterways of the Commonwealth. That permit has many, many requirements in it that we're required to do annually, such as maintenance, inspection, outreach. It really has a lot of different things in it. Within that permit, we also have to comply with the Chesapeake Bay Tmdl and a couple of local TMDLs, which I'll discuss here in a second. So a TMDL is basically just, it's an assessment that says this waterway can take a certain amount of pollution before it is harmed. And the goal is to reduce the amount of pollution that's discharged over time. So there is a Chesapeake Bay Tmdl, and it applies to the entire watershed. So everybody from Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, they all have requirements to reduce pollution within the bay. We have an action plan that's available on our website if you're interested to know kind of how we're planning on doing that. The overall goals are broken into 3 phases. We're in phase 2 of that. So by 2023, we're required to reduce our numbers by 40%. And then by 2028, the goal would be that we've implemented enough projects and actions to reduce it to a 100% reduction. So, and in addition to that, there's also local TMDLs. So Loudoun County, from DEQ to Loudoun County, has been issued certain pollution reduction goals for sediment and bacteria in the Goose Creek and Bull Run watersheds for sediment, and for bacteria in the Bull Run and Sugar Run watersheds. So we're working on actions that will reduce those pollutants in those watersheds as well. And so that's part of the reason why we do these retrofit projects or tree planting projects and things like that, is because we're required to, and it's to reduce those pollutants. And the tools in our toolkit for doing this there's a lot more than what are listed here, but these are some of the ones that we're actively doing. So we get some credit or some pollution reduction credit for just our maintenance projects that we do. And then land use changes, which I think is of interest primarily to this audience. So if we can change the land use, say, from grass to forest, then we get an annual credit for that in the reduction of the pollutants to the bay and also those local waters. We can also purchase credits on the open market from a nutrient bank, and we are doing some of that. Obviously, those credits are very expensive, so we're not just going to buy our way out of it. We also get credit for septic disconnections. So anytime Loudoun Water connects up somebody that's on a septic system, we can take credit for that as well. We also get credit for doing additional nutrient management plans. So if there's any HOAs out there that are interested in a nutrient management plan, let me know and I can help work you through that. And then I keep mentioning retrofit projects. So what a retrofit project is, it's converting an area to something else. So for example, let's say we have a dry detention basin, a stormwater basin, and we decide, that treats 10 pounds of phosphorus. Well, if we enhance it in some way, we convert it to a wetland or we do some other structural project to it. And now say maybe it treats 30 pounds of phosphorus. So we're increasing that pollution reduction through that new project. And then we can also do some stream restoration projects as well. So now I'm just going to kind of walk you through a couple of projects that we have actively done. So this is an example of a land use change like I was talking about. This is Loudoun Valley Estates 3. If you're familiar with that area, kind of over by Dulles Airport off the 606. They had a large area that they were just mowing. They really couldn't use it for anything. And so they approached us and were interested in a tree planting project. So we planted just over half an acre with about 200 or 300 trees. And I like to show this picture because if you're thinking of a tree planting project in your home HOA, this is what it's going to look like for a little while. I mean, obviously, like Kyle said, trees take a little while to grow. And some people don't find this acceptable in their backyard, and it's not really feasible to come in and plant, 300, 8-foot tall trees. It gets pretty cost prohibitive at that point. So this was another tree planting that we did over at Eagle Ridge Middle School. I think we did this back in 2017. And again, it's just same kind of thing, just a little bit bigger area. But there was a buffer between basically the road that went into the school and the HOA that the school was mowing. And we approached them and said, hey, would you consider a tree planting project? And they said, sure. So we went ahead and did that. It's a good way to get the community involved too. This particular one, they got the school kids out there. Obviously, this was pre-COVID, and we dug the holes and they got to plant trees and they had a good time with it. This particular project is an example of a retrofit project. So this is Briar Patch Park over in Sterling off of Sterling Boulevard. And at the beginning of the project, it was just, we had a pipe that came out, it daylighted here and just ran down this grass channel into the creek here down at the north side. And it drains a part of Sterling Park that had no stormwater treatment at all. So the pre-treatment or the before retrofit project treatment on this was a 0. Then we came in and we built a wetland. Basically right here, you can see that we put a little berm. They put a trail around it. And so now this treats 30 pounds of phosphorus is being removed annually because of this project. And here's some pictures. This is what it looks like today. All this wetland vegetation that's growing in here. And this is what it looked like looking downstream before we did the project. It was just a channel that was starting to erode, and then there was just some random wetland plants that were growing in there. And this area was always really soggy, and the kids couldn't really play in it anyway. All right. Last year, we also finished a constructed wetland project at Loudoun Valley Estates. So the tree planting that I showed you earlier is right in this area. So prior to the retrofit project, this was a large what we call a dry pond, meaning a dry pond fills up with water when it rains and then all the water discharges. This doesn't have a standing pool of water. We approached the HOA and they asked if they'd be interested. They agreed, and we built this beautiful wetland for them last year that so far, except for a couple of little problems, is working really well. But it's working out a lot better. Well, it's working out very, very well. So basically this whole area the water just kind of holds in here and it gets discharged through the control structure. This is what it looked like during construction. So this is another thing I like to point out to people. If you're thinking about doing these projects, it looks like a construction site. So pick your favorite construction site around the county, and that's what it's going to look like for 6 months, a year, well, maybe longer, depending on the project. So we just like to set those expectations up ahead of time. This was the kind of architect's conceptual rendering that we used. This is what it looked like before construction, looking downstream. So it had a one thin line of trees that were all half dead. And then again, this is kind of what it looked like right at the beginning of construction when they took out all the trees, except we were able to save. They wanted us to try to save as many trees as we could, and the only one we could save was a big maple tree. But I'm kind of glad it kind of adds some interesting character now to the landscape. And this is what it looked like not long after construction. So all this veg that we planted, and some of it was planted and some of it was seed. And now this is all, I don't have a today picture of it, unfortunately, but this is all grown in now. The trees are doing really well. The water's being held back. It's discharging well. So it's, we're real happy with that project. It took us 3 years though to convince the HOA to do this project, mostly because the HOA officers kept changing. Every year they were voting people in and out. And so we kind of had to keep going to their meetings and kind of walking them through the whole process and everything. So I just want to kind of reiterate, as you think about some of these projects, some of the challenges that we've run into, view shed changes, you'd be amazed at how much people get angry when you say, I'm going to tear down your old trees, but I'm going to give you, 200 new saplings. Some people see the benefit in that, and some don't. But in general, we as humans, I think we don't like change, so that can be tough. As I mentioned, we had on the Loudoun Valley Estates project that HOA board turnover. There was a lot of hand-holding. There was a lot of walking them through the process, assurances that the county's not just going to drop this in the middle and walk away. You always have the people that, not in my backyard. We think it's a great idea, but go do it somewhere else, not in my backyard. And I think the big thing is trying to manage expectations of, this is going to look bad for a while, and that that in our case the county isn't just going to pick up and walk away. A lot of times when we do these retrofit projects, HOAs want to add things in. Hey, can you put in a trail? Could you do this other little project that we've been meaning to do? And in some cases we can, but once the cost benefit reaches a certain amount, then the project's dead. So we have to be careful about that. I kind of already alluded to this a little bit, but for everybody that loves bugs and bunnies and trees and bees, there's somebody that sees that as nothing but insects and weeds and and a problem. So you have to kind of navigate those waters as well. Kyle mentioned maintenance of trees. I can't emphasize enough, maintenance is key on these things. So that little wetland that we built in Briar Patch, it looks beautiful and pristine, and it's got exactly the plants growing in it that we want to. But we have a contractor that goes out there every quarter and assesses that and it effectively removes invasives or treats cattails, etc. So if we didn't do that, that thing would just fill up with cattails, and that's all it would be. So, and then don't forget, in some cases you do have to get easements or agreements for everything. So, so that's the end of my portion of this. I will say that if any of you have any questions about stormwater in Loudoun County, please reach out to our office. We talk with people all the time. Sometimes we can't help you out, but we'll always at least try to give you some advice or point you in a direction to get the answers that you need. So thank you very much, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So you certainly have created some beautiful places in what was just grass. And I just want to mention that grass is basically an ecological desert. Kyle was talking about native species, and grass is not native. So it doesn't provide habitat for anything, not even insects, which are the bottom of the food chain. Anyway, so I'm so happy to pass it to Renee Griebe. She's from Fairfax, and she's done a lot of this kind of work. So Renee, take it away.
Thanks so much, Natalie. I'm going to talk to you today about advocating for long-term success of your conservation projects that might be on land that you don't own. So that might be in an HOA, or it might be with your faith community. We'll dive into that in a moment. So when we think about community scale conservation projects, this is where you can really make a big impact. Your individual private land is certainly a place where you can make impact too, but as you think larger scale, especially if you live in an HOA, you can really change the way we use, like Natalie mentioned, lawns, and converting that into something really productive. So what do I mean by a conservation project? I think about it as something very broad. Anything that helps improve natural environment, replacing turf grass with native plants, native trees, landscaping with natives, managing invasives, bioswales, rain gardens, meadows, reducing or eliminating lawn chemicals, or maybe even just setting up a committee that helps to actually focus on doing some of these things. So I think about it very broadly, just anything that helps improve the health of our natural environment. So I want you to have a place where you can take some notes. I'm going to ask you to think about things in your own community spaces where you might be able to drive change. So get out pen and paper or open up a document on your computer to jot down some notes. So the reason I like to think about HOAs or condo associations, particularly in Loudoun, is that if you live in one, you can drive change on a really big scale because they're big and powerful in Loudoun County, especially. Not all of them, some are smaller, but still it's more property than just your own. And you can affect ecology and watersheds, at this bigger scale. This is the Loudoun Valley 3 that Chris was talking about. So you can imagine the impact this has versus your backyard. And the great thing about HOAs or maybe your faith community is that, when you're involved in a community, you can influence it. If you're in an HOA, you live in it. So they're managed by people like that. Or in your faith community or at a school, you probably have relationships there that can help influence too what change you can drive. And when you do that change on a bigger scale in a community, you might influence individual residents to make change on their own property, which is really exciting as well. So the one thing I really want you to think about today is how you can bridge those gaps to long-term success. And the way I've thought about it for my work is that you can get inspired by so many places these days. It's so awesome to have these kind of talks. Plant Nova Natives has great resources. Maybe you've read the book Bringing Nature Home. If you haven't, you should go out and buy it. It's really great. So it's pretty easy to find inspiration, and it's actually not too hard to find resources out there for funding. Soil and Water Conservation District has the VCAP program, for example, which is the Virginia Conservation Assistance Program, or you can do tree plantings, some of the other things you've heard about tonight. So there's these two kind of edges, and maybe those are pretty easy, but the hard part, I think, especially, is this middle part of advocacy, where you really need to bring people along. Like Chris said, some people don't like their view sheds changing, and so you really need to bring people along. In an HOA specifically, or a condo association, you need to think about the boards, like Chris mentioned. They change, right? You have to really build those relationships and keep them up. There might be committees. Don't forget the residents' perspectives. What are the community needs? What does the community want? And how do you just engage them on all of these topics and listen and talk? So I like to think about this as trying to find common ground, both physically, because you want common ground to plant on in a community kind of sense, but also common ground where you can all agree. So if you and the board are having conversations and you find that you can get that space filled, that's great, but you leave out the community. Same thing if the community is asking the board something that maybe doesn't fit with the goals that you have, you're left out of the conversation. And of course, if you and the community are talking and you don't have the board's buy-in, you're not going to go get anything passed. So that middle spot where you're really exchanging ideas, talking, having conversations, getting this great middle ground, you'll have success. And that's the part that takes a lot of time and sometimes is what we skip over when we just want to get a tree planted in the ground or get a native planted in the ground. I'll just give you a quick story from my own HOA. Like Natalie mentioned, I live in Fairfax County in an HOA which is split by a park in the middle, and we have two sides of our HOA. We have 15 acres of woodlands and about 57 acres total. So we have a lot of property. And I was really lucky to, a number of years ago, have a pretty apathetic board, which I thought worked in my favor. They kind of let me do whatever I wanted, which was really nice. And I had a board member come to me and say, can you get the vinca out of this HOA garden? I don't have a before picture because I was so excited to rip it out that I ripped it out before I even remembered to take a picture. But this is what it looked like after I took all, it was just literally covered in these vines. So I said, I'll do the work, but can I make it a native plant garden? They said, sure. So that was great. And I just live half a block away from here, so I can pretty much see it from my house. So I went out and talked to some friends in the native plant world, and they gave me some plants, put them in. And the first year was like looking pretty good. I put in some non-natives like zinnias because I got them for free and butterflies like them. But I got other native plants like the brown-eyed Susans in the back, some cone flowers that aren't Virginia natives, but they're pretty and pretty well behaved, but they are North American natives. And then some golden groundsel, which is a semi-evergreen, which is, you know, a nice thing to have there for winter interest. Well, the first year it was great, but wow, native plants, when you don't pick the right plant in the right place, very similar to Kyle's right tree, right place, things go crazy. So everything just took over the garden. This was my first native plant really foray out of my front yard. It was kind of a disaster. And it looked kind of scraggly. And as you can see, the dogwood tree that was there previously died in the meantime. So we were able to replace that with a different tree, a serviceberry. But it's been a challenge to keep the garden looking nice. And so I'm really lucky in that I know the neighbors that live around here and they know me. So they know I work hard at it. And they're pretty excited about ecology. So I've been able to engage people. They've been able to see it in its best seasons and really get some beautiful flowers. And also really cool, the monarchs come. Every year this garden is just popping with monarch caterpillars and the neighbors get involved and the kids love it. So it's been a really good learning experience for me. And I've had a lot of generosity and kindness for having the garden shepherd along. So then I was able to do another project in our HOA. After I had done that one, I requested to do a rain garden, which was something I'd never done before. I got a VCAP grant from Soil and Water in Fairfax to do it. And our HOA said, sure, go ahead and do it. So this was great. We hired a contractor. We got a 50-50 match grant. We excavated in order to make it more permeable. We got the landscaping company to fill it with the right kind of soil. And then we bought the plants. We had a volunteer do a garden design. We had our volunteers put the plants in and we got it all planted. And then a month later, we had a massive rainstorm, or what we call now a normal rainstorm. But at the time, back in 2015, we weren't getting rainstorms like this as often. 3.5 inches of rain in a day. And so I ran out every hour to go see what was happening to the rain garden. And it was functioning great. This takes up just a few houses, maybe 7 townhomes worth of rain. You can see the stream obviously coming down. Later in the day, it was totally full. Awesome. Just really exciting to see. We didn't suffer too much damage. We just patched it up. It was no problem. The outflow worked perfectly. But what happened was down where this water flows in the valley, in that park in between, massive rains wiped out the under drain next to our path. I'm standing on the path, but everything had collapsed into the water. This is just massively bad for the bay. It's massively bad for our watershed. And it was a great story to say that one rain garden isn't going to solve everything. But if we think about managing stormwater, we can really help mitigate some of the big impacts like this. But you know, the problems came when, you know, maintenance of these things, this is pretty much looks like this now. It's kind of gone wild into the woods there, but it's not so pretty anymore. So we really need to think about that long-term maintenance that Kyle talked about for trees and that I'll talk about for any kind of project you might think of, particularly when it's on common property. And I mentioned that because we tried to do a second rain garden and the board said, sure, we can do that. And we picked out this location because it was really going to be a nice showcase location where people could see it. And we picked up this location and the neighbor here, when she saw me measuring and doing infiltration tests, she said, no way, do not put a rain garden in here. And so we talked about how the other rain garden wasn't pretty. She didn't want bees. She was allergic. Didn't want kids playing in it. Garbage cans have to come around that way. It was going to cause a problem that way. And so I really stepped back. This was before I worked for Audobon Naturalist Society. And I thought, man, I am missing advocacy. Nobody even knows why this is a good idea. And I didn't talk to anybody about if they thought it was a good idea. But a year later, I did a sidewalk talk where I brought Soil and Water Conservation District out for a sidewalk talk to talk about what rain gardens are good for. And I actually heard this neighbor whisper when Soil and Water mentioned that you could put a rain garden in and put grass over top of it with no native plants, but at least you'd be treating more stormwater. I heard that neighbor actually whisper to her friend, we could have done that. And I thought, man, what a missed opportunity. It wouldn't have been exactly what I wanted, but it would have achieved some of the goals that I had of helping to manage stormwater. So that advocacy part can really make something successful. So as you're thinking about identifying areas of common ground, build on those shared values that can help you achieve the goals that you might have. Sit in on on your board meetings or whatever kind of leadership committee meetings you might have in your faith community or school, and listen to what they're talking about. Maybe if they're talking about replacing the entrance signage, maybe you think about how you might be able to put native plants there once they trample all the plants that are there. Or maybe they're talking about removing dead trees. Is there a tree replacement policy where you could think about making sure you get native Virginia trees planted in their place? Or what about their standing water issues? Can you think about how you make that into a habitat or mitigate it in a different way besides just draining it as fast as you can? So understand your community structure too. If you're in an HOA and you're thinking about any kind of common property project, you really want to know what your governing documents are and all the things that regulate what you're doing in that HOA. And this is important because there's an inverse relationship to some of these things. Your bylaws and covenants are really easy to enforce, but they are hard to change. They take a lot of votes. But the easier things to change are things that maybe your committees have, guidelines that you can put out, regulations. They're harder to enforce. They require advocacy, but they're easier to change and they might be able to influence people. So think about for yourself where there might be areas of opportunity in your own community or any common place you might want to work. Do you see a problem like standing water, like I mentioned? This standing water is actually habitat. We had all of these tadpoles, but because it's baking in the sun without really good plants around it to shade it, they all died when the water dried up a little bit later. How do you make that standing water into something exciting instead of just a problem to be dealt with? Think about who owns that property. So that standing water actually is not in our HOA. It's in the Fairfax County property, which is part of the park. It's a little bit weird of a plot of land, but to know that we really can't do work there without the authority of the park authority is something good to know. And then think about the spaces and how they're used. Maybe you don't like this turf grass and you want to put in native plants, but maybe this is a gathering space that people use. They really need that grass. Or maybe the hillside that you were going to put in bluebird boxes is actually a great place for sledding, and those boxes are going to get in the way. You'll know that by talking to people, so make sure you engage the community. And then if you're going to do a project that's really by the sidewalk, highly visible, make sure it's going to look like this in the long term. You got to figure out what your maintenance plan is going to be and really keep up with it to make it looking good. Think about how you might develop a committee, a landscaping committee, a conservation committee charter, and work within the bounds of your community to actually influence what's happening. And then think about long-term success. Who are the people who are going to be engaged? You might have volunteers for that planting day, but who's going to do the maintenance long-term? Is it volunteers or is it your landscape company? Consider who will fund it. In some cases, it might be Loudoun Stormwater, but it might be your HOA, it might be a matching grant. Consider who will maintain it. That might be your landscaping company, but they might not know a lot about native plants, so you might need to work with them. And think about what's achievable. Putting in native plants at a garden might be a challenge or a rain garden, but putting in some trees in a place that your HOA is already mulching, like I did here, they were just mulching this, totally empty. What a silly thing to do. We put in a whole bunch of trees and now they're about 5 times that size. It's very exciting. But think about what's achievable and going to be easy for you to maintain. And then think about how you just market this as a way to bring your community together to be a part of it. Get them involved in the planning and the planting. It can be really fun. I can drop these links in the chat box after I'm done here, but Plant Nova Natives has so many great selections about what to plant, where, how to plan for it, and tips for your HOA or condo association, which can be easily translated to other community scale things. And then also, if you're really interested in more about advocacy and stewardship, we have a handbook. You can go sign up to get it on our website. Thank you guys so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Renee. Go ahead and put their information in the chat, and then I'm going to copy it and then put it in the follow-up emails to everybody. So you don't have to worry about copying everything down madly. Okay, wonderful. Now, earlier I saw Anand had a hand up. And so at this time is our questions and answers. And since we're a small group, what about if we just physically raise hands or electronically raise hands, and then we can ask questions?
Anand, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, this is Anand here, Anand Chaudhary. I'm first time attending this meeting. Can you hear me?
Yes, very good.
Okay, it's really exciting. You know, I just got I got an email from my HOA, and then I just RSVP and then attending this first time. But it's really exciting. I told my daughter also. So we are going to join your team. You know, so first question is that how to participate. You know, how to join your team, how to participate in like. We are interested in planting trees or volunteering. That one thing, you know. So that is the first thing. How to begin. And the second question that to Chris about the stormwater. I've seen here so many ponds in the United States in Fairfax, Virginia, Loudoun County. It's a part of beautification. But do you? I'm just curious about that. That is it by regulation or is it? It is a voluntary that you create all those beautification these ponds everywhere I see it. It also help increase to water table, you know. So that's a very innovative things I could see in US. You know, I'm from other country, you know. So that is my question. So can you explain on that too? Thank you.
Excuse me. Yeah, I think if you're asking is basically, why do we have all these stormwater ponds? Is that your question?
Yes, yeah, they got fountains, but those are really like, it's very nice to walk around, but it also the water table, and that's a good thing, you know?
Yeah, so in general, the stormwater ponds are required when a development is designed. The intent is to reduce the post-construction runoff to be equal or less than what it was before it was developed. So obviously when you're clearing the land and you're putting in pavement and houses and things like that, the rainwater is going to run off a lot faster. So that's why they want to retain it in the stormwater ponds. So that's one of the main reasons why they do it. The other is a lot of times the designers of the area will make the pond an amenity. So it'll be a place, like you said, where you can walk. They'll put trails around it. You walk around it. They might incorporate that into their common space with a gazebo or a playground or a fountain or something like that. So one, it's required in the regs when you do a development, and two, they will use them for aesthetic purposes in the community.
Thanks.
Anant, do you live in a in a neighborhood with a homeowners association?
I live in Loudoun County, in the Stone Ridge area, you know.
Okay, so it's a neighborhood. You have an HOA and
HOA, yeah, Stone Ridge HOA, yeah, it's the name of it.
awesome. So so follow Renee's advice. Find out who your board members are, attend a meeting, see what their concerns are, and maybe some of their concerns can be solved with ideas about planting trees or native landscaping. Wonderful.
Thank you.
I could tell you about an example of what you were talking about with turning a stormwater pond into a feature of your community. If anyone's seen the fountains right off of Route 7 over in Lansdowne, that's the Lansdowne Village Green stormwater pond. We've got a few of them right along Route 7 and put a fountain and trails and stuff, and it's real nice.
Yeah, I know for a fact that particular pond, that community, the high school kids go down there for prom pictures, and it's a really neat spot for them. They take a lot of pride in that. Just to be clear, there are certain things that the county maintains and certain things they do not. So aerators like those fountains, that's not something that we actually maintain. Those are put in by the HOAs to have like a beautification, make it look a little nicer.
Those are very expensive, by the way, the fountains. I get to approve the budget on that, and they're tens of thousands of dollars of maintenance sometimes in a bad year.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why the county doesn't maintain them. So. Chris,
so did you talk? I remember in one of your slides you had a price tag like $8,000. Mm-hmm. But in general, the retrofits that you do, what are the financial impacts or what are the cost impacts?
So the Briar Patch example that I showed you, that cost $330,000 to build. Loudoun Valley Estates was about 600,000 or 700,000. We're getting ready to start a stream restoration project over in Countryside. That one's going to be $4 million.
Whoa! But who's paying for it?
You all are. It's taxpayer dollars that gets funneled into our program through the budget, through the CIP.
Mhm.
So I will say that some of those we do also go after grants. So like for example, Countryside, we were able to win a grant. So DEQ is going to cover half that cost. But there again, that's being paid by you all through your state tax dollars. So that's coming back to us. So,
but it's not as if the community needs to do any direct funding for these retrofit projects. It's all through.
Correct. The Loudoun Valley Estates project, they didn't pay anything. The only time we ask for partial sharing is like, let's say the example of a trail. You know, if they want a trail put around the thing that we're building, we will not maintain the trail. We'll build it for them, but we won't maintain it long term because we don't maintain trails on private property. So that would be all kind of worked out up front, and it would be part of the agreement that said, you know, we'll design it, we'll build it, but then after that, it's yours for maintenance.
Okay, awesome. Well, we have one more minute. Burning questions, comments? You can unmute yourself, raise your hand.
How do I get you guys to come down to Sugarland and work with us here in Sugarland?
Are you talking about Sugarland Run?
Yep.
You live near Willow Pond?
That is us.
We just met with your HOA this week on
Awesome. Okay.
a possible project to enhance the pond. That one's being done in conjunction with there's an eroded area on the downstream side of the dam, which we're gonna fix. But yeah, we met with them earlier this week, so they're gonna be. We met with the HOA manager, Gabby, and and she's gonna be going to your HOA board. We gave them a nice rendering of what we thought it could possibly look like. So yeah, we're in the beginning stages of that. But if you have other areas in Sugarland Run, we're certainly happy to come take a look at them.
Well, we're always looking at the riverbeds. So we just did a cleanup. I want to say last month there was a cleanup.
Oh, nice.
But is there more that can be done alongside the riverbed?
It depends on what you're thinking about when you say more. We did look at that stream for a stream restoration project. Yeah. And it was kind of, there wasn't really a whole lot there. Bang for I should say bang for your buck, but
right.
But if there are other things or ideas that you have, by all means, reach out. I know we maintain a lot of the inflows coming into that. So by all means, let us know and we'll come and take a look. Happy to. Yeah,
because I think it was like 2 years ago, there was a sediment issue or something to that effect. And they came in, we had someone come in to talk about, doing a study of the sediment and this, that, and the other, and how much it was going to cost. And we were like, let's talk to the county. Yeah. Let's see, because they're the ones that are in charge of this. They're the ones that are in charge. Maybe they know something better than,
Yeah.
So, but I'm glad that you guys are working on that. That's very important because that was one of the things a couple of years ago that we were discussing as well. And I'm glad they're just coming back around to it again. So that's good. Yeah,
that should be something that I mentioned. Some of the stuff does take some time to get approvals, and then once you have once they say you get the thumbs up, it can take a year to design some of these things. It can then take another year to construct them. So it can take time. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Chris, for that information.
Sure.
Okay, well, I want to respect everybody's time. It is 8:02. I want to thank the presenters, Kyle, Chris, and Renee. It was a wonderful program. I'm hoping that the audience will reach out. And what would be the first step? Maybe contact Chris's office to kind of get the ball rolling. Chris, would you come and take a look and doing an assessment?
Yeah, I mean, we come out to take a look at stuff all the time. You know, sometimes, unfortunately, there's nothing there for us to be able to do. But like I said, we always at least try to guide, you know, HOAs or property owners into, you know, yeah, we might not be able to do the project, but maybe look at this avenue or whatever. So, yep.
But the examples you showed were so beautiful.
Yeah, if anybody wants to go see them sometime, I mean, I can't, you know, make 30 trips, but if you have a burning desire to go look at one, I'm happy to do a little field trip visit, you know, whatever. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much, presenters. Thank you very much, audience, for joining us. And stay tuned. Every couple of months, we do a program.